I am Naomi, 34 years old, and until a few days ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I was standing in the international arrivals terminal, completely exhausted from a business trip, when I texted our family group chat to ask if someone could pick me up. My husband Carter replied almost instantly, claiming he was trapped in a high-stakes corporate meeting in Chicago and told me to get a rideshare. His mother Brenda chimed in right after scolding me for not planning better and bothering her busy, successful son. I typed a quick apology saying I understood. But my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone on the polished airport floor. Because my husband was not in a boardroom in Chicago. He was standing exactly 50 feet away from me at baggage claim number 4, wrapping his arms tightly around his 24-year-old assistant. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you will definitely want to hear exactly how I turned my absolute heartbreak into the most ruthless, calculated takedown my city has ever seen. I stood frozen behind a massive concrete pillar, my rolling suitcase suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I had just caught an earlier flight home from a grueling 2-week audit in London, hoping to surprise Carter. Instead, I was the one receiving the surprise of a lifetime. Carter was laughing, displaying that bright, charismatic laugh he usually reserved for closing million-dollar tech deals. Riley, his assistant, was wearing a designer trench coat that cost more than my first car. She leaned up and kissed him deeply, right there in the middle of the terminal. It was not a quick, friendly peck. It was the comfortable, lingering kiss of a couple who had been doing this for a very long time. My vision blurred, and a roaring sound filled my ears, drowning out the generic airport announcements. At 34 years old, I was a senior forensic auditor. My entire career was built on finding the truth hidden in complex numbers, spotting tiny discrepancies, and pulling dark skeletons out of corporate closets. I was trained to see what other people missed. Yet the biggest fraud of my entire life had been sleeping in my own bed every single night. I watched them flirt, completely oblivious to the world around them. Carter brushed a stray lock of hair behind Riley's ear, a gesture so intimate and familiar it made my stomach violently churn. I had trusted him implicitly. I had been so buried in my own corporate audits, so focused on building our financial future together, that I had completely failed to audit my own marriage. All those late nights, he claimed to be working all those sudden weekend trips for emergency client negotiations, all of his sudden need for strict privacy in his home office. The red flags had been waving right in front of my face for months, but I had blindly chosen to trust the man I loved. I dropped my phone into my purse. A white-hot rage quickly replaced the initial shock of the betrayal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march right over there, grab Riley by her expensive hair extensions, and slap that smug, perfect smile right off Carter's face. I wanted to cause a massive scene to let every single traveler in that terminal know exactly what kind of deceitful coward he was. I took one heavy step forward, my chest heaving, the tears hot and heavy in my eyes, completely ready to detonate my life and his. But before I could take a second step, a heavy, familiar hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. The grip was firm, incredibly grounding, and absolute. I spun around, startled, and saw my parents, Richard and Helen. They had secretly driven to the airport to surprise me, holding a small welcome home balloon that now bobbed sadly in the air. But they had seen the exact same thing I had just seen. My mother, Helen, had silent tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror as she stared at her son-in-law. My father, Richard, was a retired family court judge. He was a man with a mind like a steel trap forged by 4 decades of dismantling liars in a courtroom. He was not crying. He was staring at Carter with a look of terrifying, icy calculation. "Dad," I choked out, my voice breaking under the weight of the betrayal. "He is right there. He lied to me about everything. I see him, Naomi," my father said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that demanded immediate compliance. "If you walk over there right now, he will panic. He will cry, he will beg, and he will manipulate you into thinking it is all just a huge misunderstanding. You will give him the opportunity to control the narrative and hide his tracks." But he is kissing her right in front of me, I sobbed, the pain tearing at my ribs, making it hard to breathe. And tomorrow, we are going to destroy him, my father replied, his grip on my shoulder unyielding. You are my daughter. You are a brilliant forensic auditor. We do not throw tantrums, Naomi. We gather evidence. We build a bulletproof case, and we teach him a lesson he will remember until the very last day of his life. Now wipe your eyes, turn around, and walk to my car. His calm, authoritative tone acted like a bucket of ice water over my burning anger. He was entirely right. Confronting Carter now would only give him the upper hand. It would tip him off. He would immediately start destroying the evidence I needed to protect myself. I had to be smarter than my emotions. I turned around and walked toward my father's car. The ride back to my house was suffocatingly silent. I sat in the back seat of my parents' sedan, staring at the passing highway lights. The initial paralyzing shock of seeing Carter passionately kissing Riley at the terminal was slowly wearing off, rapidly being replaced by a cold, hollow void in my chest. My mind raced backwards, scanning through the last 6 months of our marriage like a ledger full of fraudulent entries. Carter had suddenly demanded strict privacy in his home office, claiming his new corporate clients required absolute confidentiality. He had started taking late-night international calls that required him to pace the backyard in the freezing cold, whispering into his phone. His wardrobe budget had tripled, his closet, suddenly filled with tailored suits and expensive cologne that he never used to care about. I had trusted him implicitly. We were supposed to be a team. I had been so consumed by my own corporate audits, so determined to secure our financial future by working long hours, that I had failed to audit the man sleeping right next to me. I had ignored the glaring red flags because I loved him. But blind love was a very dangerous liability I could no longer afford to carry in my heart. When my father pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. It stood there like a mocking monument to the life I thought I had built. My mother, Helen, broke the heavy silence, her voice thick with maternal rage and heartbreak. I want to pack your bags, Naomi. You are coming home with us tonight. I will not let you sleep in the same house as that monster. No, I said quietly, my voice steady. The tears had stopped. The forensic auditor inside me had woken up cold, calculating, and ready for war. If I leave tonight, he immediately knows that I caught him red-handed. If I leave, he immediately starts hiding his money. He will immediately start shredding documents, moving hidden assets, and scrambling his digital footprint. He will absolutely go on the defensive, and I will lose the only true element of surprise I have. My father shifted this car into park and turned to look at me. The dim streetlights illuminated the proud, hard lines of his face. He looked at me not just as a father, but as a seasoned judge evaluating a prosecutor before a trial. Are you sure you can play this part, Naomi? You have to smile at him. You have to sleep next to him. You have to play the dutiful, oblivious wife while we dismantle his life brick by brick. If you crack, if you show him your anger, we lose the upper hand. I looked at my childhood hero, the man who had taught me to play chess when I was 6, and told me to always think 5 moves ahead. I can do it, Dad. I am not going to let him win. Good. Richard said, a spark of pride in his eyes. First thing tomorrow morning, we call Jamal. We are going to need a digital footprint to track every move he has made. I nodded firmly. Jamal was the protective husband of my younger sister, a brilliant African-American cybersecurity expert who worked for a top-tier defense contractor. Jamal did not play games. With his technical skills and security clearance, he could bypass any commercial firewall. If there was a digital trail left behind by an arrogant man, Jamal would undoubtedly find it and hand it to me. My parents waited in the driveway until I unlocked the front door and waved them off. I walked into my empty house. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears. I unpacked my travel bags, separating my clothes with precision. I put on my silk pajamas and made myself a cup of chamomile tea to steady my nerves. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the clock. I mentally prepared myself for the hardest performance of my entire life. I had to lock away my broken heart, compartmentalize the staggering betrayal, and channel every ounce of my professional auditing training. 2 hours later, I heard the familiar hum of Carter's luxury sedan pulling into our garage. The front door unlocked with a click. He walked in, dropping his leather briefcase on the entryway table with a thud that made me flinch. "Naomi, babe," he called out, his voice perfectly laced with manufactured exhaustion. I took a deep, fortifying breath, pasted on a warm, loving smile, and walked out of the kitchen to greet the man who had just destroyed my world. "Hey, honey. How was your big meeting in Chicago?" Carter sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck as he walked over and kissed my forehead. I held my breath, instantly detecting the faint, unmistakable scent of Riley's expensive floral perfume clinging tightly to his shirt collar. It made me want to vomit right there in the hallway, but I kept my bright smile perfectly intact. "Brutal," Carter said, shaking his head and looking me directly in the eyes without a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. "Absolute nightmare from start to finish. The client was incredibly demanding, the flights were delayed for hours, and the hotel service was terrible. I am just so incredibly glad to be home with you, finally. How was your Uber ride from the airport?" "It was perfectly fine." I lied smoothly, matching his deceitful gaze with my own calculated warmth. "I am just so proud of you and glad you secured the deal. You work so incredibly hard for us, Carter. Everything I do for this family," he said, offering me that charismatic $1 million smile that had successfully fooled me for 10 years. "I know you do," I thought to myself, wrapping my arms around his waist in a fake, sickening embrace. "And I am going to take every penny of it before I am done." He pulled away from our embrace with a heavy sigh, tossing his suit jacket onto the armchair. I stood perfectly still, watching him play the exhausted corporate martyr. He unzipped his leather carry-on bag, and I immediately noticed how meticulously packed it was. Carter was notoriously messy, his clothes always shoved into his suitcase in a wrinkled pile. But this bag was perfectly organized with crisp precision. Riley must have packed it for him. The realization felt like a knife twisting in my ribs, but I kept my face entirely blank. "I brought you something from the Windy City," he said, pulling out a small box of gourmet chocolates. I instantly recognized the brand. It was sold exclusively in the duty-free shops of our local terminal, not Chicago. He had likely purchased it 20 minutes before I saw him kissing his assistant by the carousel. "Oh, Carter, you should not have," I cooed, taking the box with a gentle smile. "You must have been so rushed between your meetings." He ran a hand through his hair, wearing an expression of deep, manufactured sorrow. "Honestly, Naomi, I barely had a second to breathe, but I wanted to bring you a little something to show you I am always thinking about you." He sat heavily on the edge of our bed, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked up at me, his eyes taking on a pleading, vulnerable quality. "We need to talk, babe," he murmured, his voice softening into a carefully practiced tone of concern. I sat down next to him, placing my hand over his. "What is wrong?" I asked, projecting absolute innocence. He sighed again, staring at our joined hands. "I just feel like we are drifting apart lately. You are always flying off to London or New York for corporate audits. It is incredibly lonely for me, Naomi. I am out there killing myself to secure our financial future, fighting demanding clients in Chicago, and I come home to an empty house half the time. I feel like I am carrying the emotional weight of this marriage all by myself." The sheer audacity of his gaslighting literally took my breath away. He was sitting in the bedroom of a house I paid the primary down payment for, smelling like the cheap floral perfume of his 24-year-old mistress. And he was actually blaming me for the distance in our marriage. He was actively manipulating the narrative to make my hard work the villain of our story. I dealt with corporate criminals who embezzled millions, but none of them possessed the chilling sociopathic ease that my husband was currently displaying. I forced tears to pool in my eyes, letting my lower lip tremble just enough to look convincing. "I am so sorry, Carter," I whispered, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I had no idea you were feeling so neglected. I have just been trying to secure my promotion at the firm so we can build a better life together. I promise I will be a better wife." I felt his shoulders relax instantly. The tension completely left his body. He had tested the waters, thrown out a ridiculous accusation, and I had immediately taken the bait and assumed all the blame. I could practically feel the smug satisfaction radiating off him. He wrapped his arms around me, kissing the top of my head. "We will get through it, babe," he assured me softly. "We just need to prioritize each other. Marriage takes hard work and absolute honesty." I closed my eyes, resting my face against his chest, listening to the steady, calm heartbeat of a monster. "You have absolutely no idea what hard work is coming for you," I promised him silently. Carter stood up, announcing he needed a hot shower to wash off the travel grime. As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut, my posture instantly straightened. The fake tears dried. I picked up his discarded phone from the nightstand. It was locked with a new passcode he changed 2 months ago. I did not try to guess it. I knew Jamal would crack it open when the time came. I simply memorized the position of the phone, ensuring I placed it back exactly where he left it. The next morning was Saturday, a day we usually spent relaxing together. Instead, Carter woke up early, dressed in a sharp, casual outfit, and sprayed on his expensive cologne. He claimed he needed to head into the office for a few hours to finalize the paperwork from his Chicago trip. I smiled, handed him his travel mug of coffee, and kissed his cheek. I knew perfectly well he was heading straight to Riley's apartment. Before he walked out the door, he turned back to me. "Do not forget, we are expected at my mother's house for Sunday dinner tomorrow night. Brenda wants to hear all about your London trip. Try to keep the accounting jargon to a minimum this time." "Okay, you know how she gets when she feels bored." I gripped the counter tightly, maintaining my pleasant facade. "Of course, Carter. I will keep it light and entertaining. I would not dream of boring Brenda." He flashed one last brilliant smile and headed out the door. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I let the mask drop entirely. I had exactly 24 hours to mentally prepare myself for the suffocating, toxic environment of my in-laws' house. Brenda and her daughter Cynthia had spent years making snide, passive-aggressive remarks about my career, my appearance, and my supposedly dull personality. They had always treated Carter like a golden deity who could do absolutely no wrong. But knowing what I knew now, navigating their dinner table was going to require an entirely new level of psychological endurance. I poured my coffee down the sink, grabbed my notebook, and began writing down every single detail of Carter's lies from the night before. The audit had officially begun. Sunday evening arrived with a suffocating heaviness. As Carter and I pulled into Brenda's sprawling, overly manicured driveway, I took a final steadying breath. I looked straight ahead, fixing my posture. You see, when you are preparing to dismantle someone's life, you have to master the art of the perfect, unwavering gaze. You look them right in the eye, holding that single stable position, and you let them believe they are the ones in control. Carter cut the engine of his luxury sedan and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He adjusted his collar, completely oblivious to the cold, analytical stare I was giving the side of his head. I was cataloging his every movement. We walked up the brick pathway to the faux colonial monstrosity that I had secretly helped finance. Brenda swung the front door open before Carter even had a chance to ring the bell. She bypassed me entirely, throwing her arms around her golden boy as if he had just returned from a grueling military deployment rather than a weekend of cheating. My brilliant, hardworking son Brenda cooed loudly, squeezing his shoulders. "You look absolutely exhausted. That Chicago trip must have taken everything out of you. Come inside. I made your favorite roast." She finally acknowledged me with a tight, obligatory smile that barely reached her eyes. "Naomi, you made it. You look incredibly tired. That London audit must have been terribly draining. I do not understand why you insist on working those grueling hours when Carter is practically running his entire company." I maintained a placid, unwavering expression, holding my emotional center perfectly static. "It is just a job, Brenda," I said smoothly, stepping inside the opulent foyer. "Somebody has to crunch the numbers." Carter chuckled modestly, playing the role of the humble king to absolute perfection while pouring himself a glass of water. "Now Mom Naomi works very hard. It is just different from what I do." Cynthia Carter's older sister appeared from the living room. She was swirling a massive glass of Chardonnay, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Well, someone has to handle the boring spreadsheets while Carter does the real visionary work, she chimed in, offering me a remarkably condescending smirk. Right, Naomi? I forced a polite nod, absorbing the verbal strike without a single flinch. For the past 5 years, I had endured their relentless passive-aggressive jabs. They viewed my career as a tedious, unglamorous hobby, completely blind to the fact that my base salary was actually significantly higher than Carter's. They treated my profession like a joke, ignoring the fact that my financial stability was the very foundation keeping this entire family afloat. Carter never once corrected them. He liked being the undisputed golden child. He craved their constant worship. We moved into the formal dining room. The table was set with Brenda's finest china and crystal glasses. I took my assigned seat next to Carter, keeping my hands neatly folded in my lap, acting exactly like the obedient wife they expected me to be. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way Cynthia constantly checked her phone, the way Brenda kept piling premium cuts of roast beef onto Carter's plate while handing me the salad bowl. During dinner, Brenda dominated the conversation, treating Carter like a fragile hero who had just conquered a hostile nation. So tell us about Chicago, sweetheart, she urged, leaning forward with rapt attention. Was the client as difficult as you feared? I sat perfectly still, not moving a muscle, looking directly at Carter as he began to weave his elaborate web of lies. He did not stutter. He did not break eye contact with his mother. He casually took a sip of red wine and spun a detailed, entirely fabricated story about a demanding client named Mr. Henderson. He complained about the terrible room service at the Chicago Hilton and described the grueling boardroom negotiations that kept him up until 2 in the morning. He was a spectacular, terrifying liar. He portrayed himself as the exhausted, dedicated provider, sacrificing his own comfort for the sake of our family. I watched his hands move as he spoke, noting the utter lack of nervous tells. He was a sociopath in a custom-tailored suit, completely detached from reality. You work too hard. Carter. Cynthia sighed dramatically, taking another large gulp of her wine. You really need a vacation. You should take a long weekend and just unplug. Maybe go somewhere tropical and leave the corporate stress behind. Carter offered a weary, modest smile. I wish I could sin. But I have to secure this vice president promotion first. I am doing it all for our future. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my salad, making a direct, silent connection with my own inner resolve. Every lie he told, every piece of fake sympathy his mother and sister offered, was just another piece of evidence I was quietly filing away. I did not interrupt his performance. I let him build his glorious fictional pedestal as high as he possibly could. The higher he climbed, the harder the inevitable fall would be. This dinner was a masterclass in toxic family dynamics. Brenda and Cynthia were not merely his relatives. They were his enablers, feeding his monumental ego, while actively trying to make me feel small and insignificant. They genuinely believed I was just a boring, oblivious accountant who lacked the charm and vibrancy to keep a man like Carter satisfied. As the main course concluded, the tension in the room felt thick and heavy. Brenda dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and smiled warmly at her son. I am just so incredibly proud of you, Carter. You always know exactly how to handle complex situations. I placed my fork down on my plate, keeping my posture entirely rigid and my face perfectly calm. Yes, I agreed softly, looking right at him. You are incredibly good at managing your darkest secrets. Carter let out a loud, booming laugh, completely missing the razor-sharp edge of my words. He genuinely assumed I was making a flattering joke about his ruthless corporate negotiations. Brenda smiled warmly at him, pouring the last drop of wine into his glass, before turning her rigid attention back to me. She instructed me to clear the dinner plates and bring out the dessert plates from the kitchen. I stood up gracefully, stacking the fine china without making a single sound. I carried the heavy load into the kitchen, the swinging door shutting softly behind me. As I set the plates on the granite counter, I realized I had forgotten the silver dessert tongs left resting near the centerpiece. I turned around and walked quietly back toward the dining room. But as I approached the hallway, the sound of Cynthia speaking stopped me dead in my tracks. Her voice was hushed, lacking the performative sweetness she used when I was in the room. I pressed my back flat against the cool hallway wall, completely hidden from their view. I maintained a perfectly still frame, holding my breath, listening as if my life depended on it. So Cynthia whispered with a nasty little giggle, "Did Riley like the necklace?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I felt a sudden drop in my blood pressure, the world tilting slightly on its axis. "Keep your voice down," Carter hissed, though I could hear the smug satisfaction dripping from his words. But yes, she absolutely loved it. It cost me a small fortune, but it was worth every single penny. She was wearing it when I picked her up at the terminal yesterday. Brenda let out a soft, approving laugh, the sound of a mother proudly enabling her son. "Well, she is a lovely girl, Carter. So full of life, so attentive and vibrant. Not like your wife. Naomi is just so incredibly dry. She is so obsessed with her spreadsheets and her corporate rules. Riley actually knows how to treat a successful man. Riley makes you look good." I stood in the shadows, my fingernails digging so intensely into my palms that the skin nearly broke. They knew. His mother and his older sister did not just know about the affair. They actively approved of it. They were actively cheering him on while sitting in a house that I had personally financed. They were eating food that my paycheck had bought, casually discussing my replacement as if I were a defective appliance they were waiting to return to the store. I know Mom, Carter sighed heavily, playing the victim once again. Just give me a few more months to tolerate this situation. Once the Zenith Tech promotion officially goes through and I restructure the new executive stock options, I will file the divorce papers. I just need to make sure Naomi does not get her hands on the new assets or the bonus. I have a plan to secure everything under a different entity. If I play this right, she takes the fall for the corporate debts and I walk away perfectly clean. "You are much too smart for her, sweetie," Brenda said fondly. "You always have been. Just play the game a little longer. Riley understands the big picture. She knows she is the one you truly want." I closed my eyes and stared into the dark hallway. I want you to imagine looking directly into the lens of a camera, holding a perfectly static frame, refusing to let the audience see you break. That is exactly what I did in that hallway. I did not shed a single tear. The deep, crushing sadness I felt at the airport was completely eradicated, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifying rage. They were treating my marriage, my finances, and my entire life like a temporary inconvenience they could just sweep under the rug. My husband was not merely unfaithful. He was actively plotting to engineer my financial ruin, and his family was giving him a standing ovation for it. I took a deep, stabilizing breath. I smoothed the front of my dress, ensuring my expression was molded into a mask of flawless domestic bliss. I walked out of the shadows and back into the dining room to collect the silver tongs. "Everything okay in here?" I asked cheerfully, maintaining steady eye contact with the three people who were just conspiring to ruin my life. Brenda jumped slightly in her chair, her hand flying to her chest. Carter recovered instantly, offering me that same smooth, deceitful smile. "Everything is perfect, babe. We were just talking about my upcoming work projects." "Great," I said, my voice light and steady. "I will be right back with the pie." I turned and walked back to the kitchen, my posture perfectly aligned. The emotional shift inside me was profound and permanent. I no longer viewed them as family. I viewed them as hostile targets in a high-stakes corporate audit. I spent the remainder of that evening playing the perfect, quiet accountant. I served the pie. I poured the coffee. I listened to Cynthia boast about her latest country club event and nodded politely when Brenda offered unsolicited advice about my hair. Every single lie they told, every piece of fake sympathy they offered, was just another line item in the ledger of their destruction. When we finally left the house and got back into Carter's car, he reached over and squeezed my knee. "You did great tonight, Naomi. Mom really appreciated you listening to her stories." I looked at his hand resting on my leg, then looked up at his handsome, lying face. "I am always happy to play my part, Carter." The drive home was quiet. I stared out the window, calculating my next moves with absolute precision. Tomorrow, I would meet with my father and Jamal. We were going to need a lot more than just a digital footprint now. We needed a comprehensive financial teardown. I had exactly 5 days to prepare for the Zenith Tech Gala, 5 days to build an airtight trap that Carter and his wretched family could never escape. The audit was no longer just about discovering the truth. It was about executing flawless, undeniable justice. Monday morning arrived with the harsh, bright sunlight of reality. Carter woke up and went through his usual morning routine. He drank his coffee, adjusted his designer tie, kissed my cheek, and drove off to his executive office at Zenith Tech. The moment his luxury sedan cleared our neighborhood gates, the dutiful, oblivious wife completely ceased to exist. I walked straight into my home office and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I pulled out a brand new, pristine legal pad and a pen. I drew a sharp, straight line right down the middle of the empty page. On the left side, I wrote the word assets. On the right side, I wrote the word liabilities. Carter was no longer my partner in life. He was a critical liability, a highly toxic asset that needed to be aggressively and ruthlessly liquidated. I realized in that quiet room that crying was a luxury I could simply no longer afford. Emotion clouds professional judgment, and absolute unbiased judgment was the only weapon I had left in my arsenal. If you are watching this, and you have ever found yourself standing in the wreckage of a betrayed life, you know exactly what I mean. You reach a point where the pain burns away, leaving nothing but cold, hard steel in your veins. You stop asking why they did it, and you start asking how you are going to make them pay for it. I looked directly ahead, firming my posture, holding my emotional center perfectly static. I logged into my secure home terminal. I bypassed my usual corporate work servers and opened a private, highly encrypted communication channel. I sent a single coded message to my father and Jamal, officially scheduling our tactical briefing at my parents' house for Tuesday evening. Jamal confirmed receipt within 2 minutes. The alliance was fully activated. Then I began the physical audit of my own home. I started with Carter's home office. He genuinely thought he was incredibly smart, but arrogant men always leave a careless trail. They firmly believe they are invincible, which makes them dangerously sloppy. I began combing through his desk drawers, checking the false bottoms and the hidden compartments. Finding nothing physical, I moved to our shared home server. He had created a hidden file directory buried deep within a mundane folder labeled as Tax Archives. It was heavily password protected, but Carter used the exact same generic passcode for his gym membership and his country club locker. It took me exactly 3 attempts to break through his pathetic security wall. Inside the hidden folder, I found the initial digital breadcrumbs. I discovered a series of spreadsheets tracking hidden transfers from our joint savings into a private banking account I did not recognize. The transferred amounts were carefully kept just under the $10,000 reporting threshold to intentionally avoid triggering automatic banking alerts. He had been slowly bleeding our joint resources dry for 8 solid months. Every single time I deposited my quarterly bonus, a calculated fraction of it vanished into this phantom account. I felt a physical jolt of adrenaline rush through my system. This was no longer a simple tragic case of a cheating husband having a midlife crisis. This was deliberate financial warfare. He was actively using my hard-earned money to finance his secret life with Riley. He had paid for the Chicago hotel rooms, the expensive dinners, the flights, and highly likely that $40,000 diamond necklace, using the very funds I worked 60-hour weeks to secure. I meticulously downloaded every single ledger, every bank statement, and every digital receipt onto an encrypted flash drive. I worked with surgical precision. I did not alter a single file. I left his digital environment completely undisturbed, ensuring the last access timestamps matched his own login history. A seasoned auditor never alerts the subject of an investigation before the final devastating report is ready for publication. Next, I moved to our physical fireproof filing cabinet. I pulled our recent tax returns, the deed to our house, and the mortgage paperwork for Brenda's faux colonial home. I cross-referenced the payment schedules. I realized Carter had quietly changed the mailing address for the mortgage statements to his Zenith Tech office suite. He did not want me seeing the rapidly dwindling balance in the joint account that fed his mother's house payments. He was actively trying to blindfold me, keeping me in the dark while he prepared his exit strategy. I sat back in my leather desk chair and looked around the room. I want you to understand the exact mental shift that occurs when you realize your entire life is an active crime scene. I did not feel sorrow. I felt a terrifying, absolute clarity. I was 34 years old. I had built a sterling reputation in the financial sector. I had sacrificed my weekends, my holidays, and my youth to build a solid foundation for a man who viewed me as nothing more than a profitable stepping stone. I picked up my phone and called my private bank. I spoke directly to the senior branch manager, a woman I had worked with for over a decade. I requested an immediate hard freeze on all secondary lines of credit attached to my primary accounts. I flagged my social security number for high-level fraud alerts. I effectively placed an invisible, impenetrable legal wall around my core assets. Carter could keep draining the joint account he thought I was ignoring, but he would never touch another dime of my sole capital. When Carter returned home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen. I had prepared his favorite meal. I poured him a glass of expensive red wine. I asked him about his day at Zenith Tech, listening with rapt attention as he complained about his subordinates. I watched his mouth move. I watched the arrogant gleam in his eyes. He truly believed he was the smartest person in the room. He believed I was just the quiet, reliable accountant who would happily wash his clothes and fund his mother's lifestyle while he built a secret empire with his young assistant. He asked if I was feeling okay, noting that I seemed unusually quiet during dinner. I smiled warmly, looking him right in the eye, and told him I was just mentally preparing for a massive upcoming audit. He laughed loudly, patted my hand condescendingly, and told me not to work too hard. The irony was absolutely exquisite. That night, lying next to him in the pitch dark, I did not shed a single tear. I matched my breathing to his steady rhythm, playing the part of the sleeping wife. I mapped out the upcoming week in my head. Tuesday would be the gathering of intelligence with Jamal and my father. Wednesday would be the execution of legal traps. Thursday would be securing the final nail in the coffin. Friday would be the Zenith Tech corporate gala, the highly anticipated night he expected to be crowned vice president of sales. I stared at the ceiling, my mind razor-sharp and unyielding. I was no longer a victim of his betrayal. I was the architect of his absolute ruin. He had ignited a fire to burn my house down, completely unaware that I was standing inside with enough gasoline to incinerate his entire world. Tuesday evening arrived with a heavy, impending sense of purpose. I told Carter I was working late at the firm to finalize a preliminary audit report. He kissed my cheek, completely oblivious, and told me to grab takeout on the way home. The moment I backed my car out of our driveway, I drove straight to my parents' house in the upscale suburbs of the city. I pulled into the driveway and parked behind a familiar black SUV. Jamal was already there. My sister's husband, Jamal, was a towering, brilliant African-American cybersecurity expert who worked for a top-tier defense contractor. He was a man who spoke very little, but saw absolutely everything. If there was a digital lock, Jamal possessed the key. If there was a hidden server, Jamal could map its exact coordinates blindfolded. He was fiercely protective of our family, and the moment my father called him, he had canceled all his evening plans without a single question. I walked through the front door and headed straight down the long corridor to my father's study. The room smelled of old paper leather bindings and dark mahogany. It was a room designed for serious consequences. My father, Richard, sat behind his massive desk. As a retired family court judge, he had spent 40 years looking down from the bench at liars, cheats, and manipulators. He wore a crisp white shirt, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying authority. My mother, Helen, sat on the leather sofa to his right. She was not crying today. The shock from the airport terminal had completely evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective maternal rage that she kept perfectly concealed behind a calm, stoic expression. She held a fresh cup of black coffee in her hands, her eyes locked on me as I entered. Jamal sat opposite my father, a heavy encrypted laptop open on his knees. The screen cast a pale blue glow across his sharp features. He looked up, his jaw set in a hard line. "Are you ready for this?" Naomi Jamal asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Because once we open these digital doors, we cannot unsee what is inside. We are crossing a line from domestic dispute into a full-blown financial investigation." I walked over to the heavy wooden desk and dropped my encrypted flash drive right next to his laptop. "I am a forensic auditor, Jamal. I live for the investigation. I already did a preliminary sweep of his home office and our shared local servers. He has a hidden directory masked as a tax archive. He is siphoning money from our joint savings in calculated increments, staying deliberately under the $10,000 reporting threshold to avoid triggering banking alerts. He thinks he is a financial genius." My father leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the desk. "He is not a genius, Naomi. He is a narcissist. And narcissists always leave a trail because they genuinely believe they are too smart to ever be caught. They view everyone around them as supporting actors in their own grand production." Helen placed her coffee cup on the side table and looked at me with piercing clarity. "He wants to drain you dry and leave you holding the bag while he builds a new life with that 24-year-old assistant. We are not going to let that happen. We are going to strip him down to nothing." Jamal took my flash drive and plugged it into his secure terminal. His large hands moved across the keyboard with breathtaking speed. Lines of code reflected in his dark eyes as he bypassed Carter's elementary password protections in a matter of seconds. "His local security is a complete joke," Jamal noted, shaking his head in mild disgust. "He uses the same generic passcode for his hidden financial folders as he does for his country club account. All right, let us see where these offshore reroutes are heading. I am establishing a secure proxy connection so nothing traces back to this network." The room fell completely silent. The only sound was the rapid, rhythmic clicking of Jamal's keyboard. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my rigid posture. I was entirely focused on the glowing screen. I did not feel the sting of a betrayed wife. I felt the cold, analytical thrill of an investigator closing in on a massive fraud ring. My father watched Jamal work his judicial mind, already anticipating the legal maneuvers we would need to execute. "We need irrefutable proof of intent," Richard said firmly. "Moving money out of a joint account is slimy, but in a divorce proceeding, a clever lawyer will argue it was for legitimate household expenses or bad investments. We need to prove he is maliciously hiding marital assets to fund an illicit relationship." "Oh, we are going to get much more than that," Jamal murmured, his eyes narrowing as he hit a wall of encrypted data. He leaned closer to the screen. "Carter is not just moving joint funds, Richard. He is actively communicating with external servers. I am tracking the IP addresses tied to his recent wire transfers." "What are you seeing?" I asked, stepping closer to the desk. Jamal tapped a key, expanding a complex web of digital routing nodes on his monitor. He is bouncing funds through a series of temporary holding accounts. It is a classic layering technique used in money laundering. But he is sloppy. He accessed these accounts from his personal smartphone while connected to your home network. He basically left his digital fingerprints all over the crime scene. Helen stood up and walked over to stand beside me, her presence a solid, comforting weight. "Can you get inside the holding accounts, Jamal? Can you see where the money is actually sitting right now?" Jamal cracked his knuckles, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Give me exactly 5 minutes. I am going to initiate a backdoor protocol." The room held its collective breath as Jamal initiated the backdoor protocol. His large hands flew across the keyboard with a mesmerizing, fluid grace. I watched lines of complex code reflect against his dark eyes. He was completely in his element, navigating the digital underworld with the precision of a seasoned combat veteran. Jamal did not just understand cybersecurity, he lived it. As a top-tier expert for a defense contractor, he regularly thwarted international syndicates. A cheating husband's amateur financial obfuscation was child's play to him. "I need to bypass the two-factor authentication he linked to his primary email account." Jamal explained, his voice a low, steady hum in the quiet study. Carter thinks he is secure because he receives a text alert every time an unrecognized device attempts a login. But since he connected his hidden offshore accounts using your shared home wireless network, I can spoof the router's hardware address. The banking server will simply register my laptop as his personal desktop computer. No alerts, no red flags. He is entirely blind. My father nodded slowly, absorbing the tactical advantage. Brilliant work, Jamal. We need to secure the communication logs first. If we are going to build an airtight case of malicious marital fraud, we must establish the timeline of his infidelity. We need to prove he premeditated this financial drain to support his mistress. I am already inside his secondary email archive, Jamal announced, tapping the enter key with a sharp, definitive click. He created a hidden alias account strictly for his interactions with Riley. It is a treasure trove of terrible decisions. My chest tightened, but my posture remained perfectly rigid. I stepped closer to the monitor. "Pull it up," I said, my voice lacking any trace of hesitation. "Let me see exactly who I have been married to for the past 10 years. Jamal opened the inbox and the screen flooded with hundreds of email threads, calendar invites, and digital receipts. The sheer volume of the betrayal was staggering. There were confirmation emails for luxury weekend getaways to Napa Valley, private dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants, and electronic tickets for first-class flights to Miami. All of it meticulously planned and executed during the times Carter claimed to be exhausted from high-stakes corporate negotiations or traveling for mandatory Zenith Tech seminars. "Look at the dates," I pointed out, leaning over Jamal's shoulder. My eyes scanned the digital ledger, mapping the timeline of deceit against my own memories. He booked that couples retreat in Aspen, on the exact same weekend I was in New York finalizing a massive merger audit. He texted me that Saturday night complaining about eating frozen pizza alone in our living room while he was actually ordering expensive room service with a 24-year-old. Helen let out a sharp, disgusted breath. "He is a predator, Naomi. He has been feeding off your hard work while grooming his replacement on your dime. We need to download every single receipt," Jamal, my father, instructed, his judicial instincts taking full control. "Save the metadata. We must preserve the timestamps and the geolocation tags. When we eventually present this to a judge, I want zero room for his defense attorney to claim these documents were doctored or taken out of context." "Already done," Richard, Jamal replied, a progress bar rapidly filling on the side of his screen. "I am mirroring the entire drive to an encrypted external server. But the emails are just the surface layer. I am running a deep network diagnostic right now to see what else he connected to your home Wi-Fi. Arrogant guys like Carter always forget that smart devices constantly talk to each other." A few minutes passed in tense silence. The progress bar hit 100%. Jamal typed a new command, initiating a scan of the localized network topology. A complex map of interconnected nodes appeared on the monitor, representing every single digital device that had ever pinged the router in my house. "There," Jamal said, pointing to a tiny flashing icon on the peripheral edge of the network map. "I knew it. He has a secondary mobile device, a burner phone. He probably keeps it locked in his car or hidden in his golf bag. But because he was careless enough to bring it into the house, the router logged its unique identification number. Can you access it?" I asked, my analytical mind racing ahead to the possibilities. "Can you pull the location data from a dormant device?" Jamal offered a tight, confident smile. "I do not even need to access the phone itself, Naomi. Since the device pinged your home network, I can query the cellular provider's location history using a backdoor diagnostic tool I developed for my government contracts. It will take a minute to fetch the telemetry data." We watched the screen as Jamal executed the query. A digital map of our city materialized on the monitor, covered in hundreds of tiny red dots. Each dot represented a location where Carter's secret burner phone had connected to a cellular tower over the past 8 months. "He spends a massive amount of time in the downtown financial district," Jamal observed, zooming in on a dense cluster of red dots. "Specifically right here on West Fifth Avenue. Does Riley live in that area?" "No," I answered, shaking my head. "Riley lives in a cheap studio apartment complex near the university campus. I saw her address on a Zenith Tech directory list once. That downtown sector is strictly high-end commercial real estate and luxury condominiums. There is absolutely no reason for him to spend several nights a week at that specific location. My father leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the map. Unless he is not just visiting someone there. Unless he acquired property. Jamal's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Let me cross-reference this exact GPS coordinate with the destination routing numbers from the hidden bank accounts we found earlier. If he is funneling money out of your joint savings, he has to be putting it somewhere tangible. The air in the study felt electric, charged with the imminent revelation of a massive financial crime. Jamal executed the cross-reference command. The computer processed the data matching the geographic coordinates of Carter's secret phone with the financial routing codes from the holding accounts. The screen flashed green, returning a direct match. "You were right, Richard," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a serious low register. "He is not just hiding cash in offshore accounts. The destination routing numbers belong to a commercial escrow firm located right in the heart of that downtown district. He is moving capital to purchase real estate." I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly snapping into place, revealing a picture far more sinister than simple infidelity. He was actively draining my resources to build a parallel life. "We need to find out exactly what he is buying," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "We need to see the incorporation documents and the property deeds." Jamal cracked his knuckles again, preparing to dive even deeper into the digital abyss. "Hold on tight, Naomi," he warned. "I am breaching the escrow firm's client portal right now. We are about to blow this entire operation wide open." The monitor illuminated Jamal's focused expression as lines of encrypted code cascaded down the terminal window. I stood beside my father, breath caught. Infiltrating a commercial escrow portal crossed a legal boundary. But the rules changed when my husband turned my marriage into a financial crime. Jamal executed a final command, bypassing the firewall. The dark terminal vanished, replaced by a white dashboard bearing the official logo of a corporate escrow firm. "We are in," Jamal announced, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who just successfully picked the lock on a bank vault. "I am pulling the entire client directory now. Give me a name to search." "Try his full legal name," I instructed, my eyes scanning the screen. "Or maybe just search the exact routing number we isolated from the hidden banking ledger." Jamal entered the digits. The system processed the request before returning a single detailed client dossier. He clicked the icon to expand the file. A dozen PDF documents populated the screen. They were labeled with dry titles like Articles of Incorporation, Primary Beneficiary Agreements, and Master Promissory Notes. "Open the first one," my father ordered, his judicial instincts kicking into overdrive. "Let us see exactly what kind of entity he registered." Jamal clicked the PDF. The document filled the screen, displaying a formal business registration certificate filed in Delaware. My eyes darted across the text, seeking the structural data. The company was registered as an LLC. The corporate title was listed boldly at the top, NC Holdings. Naomi and Carter Helen breathed from her spot on the leather sofa, her tone dripping with absolute revulsion. "He even used your initial for his fraudulent shell company." "It gets substantially worse," Jamal said, scrolling down to the second page of the corporate filing. "Look at the executive officer designations." I leaned close to this monitor. My eyes locked onto the primary shareholder designation. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Carter was not listed as the primary owner. He was merely designated as the registered agent for administrative filing purposes. My full legal name sat squarely on the primary guarantor line. I was listed as holding 100% of the corporate liability. "He put the entire shell company in my name," I whispered, the sheer audacity of the legal maneuver stunning my analytical mind. My father adjusted his reading glasses, his jaw clenching with barely contained fury. "Look at the bottom of the page, Naomi. He forged your consent." I stared at the signature block. There it was. My name signed in a cursive script that looked authentic. Carter knew exactly how I signed official banking documents. He lived with me for a decade, watching me sign tax returns and mortgage papers. He perfectly replicated the slight tilt of my letters and the distinctive loop of my initial. To any loan officer, that signature would look completely legitimate. He stole my identity, I stated, evaluating the terrifying fact with absolute clinical precision. This is not just a hidden account to buy fancy dinners for his assistant. This is aggressive, premeditated identity theft. Jamal immediately began opening the subsequent PDF files. We need to see what he is actually doing with this entity. Shell companies are designed for one specific purpose: moving large volumes of undocumented capital while shielding the actual operator from legal scrutiny. Let us look at the promissory notes. The next document was a commercial line of credit agreement. I read the numbers, my forensic training instantly translating the data into a horrifying narrative. Carter had leveraged my spotless credit history, a credit score I had spent my entire adult life building, to secure a massive commercial loan under the guise of NC Holdings. The principal amount was staggering: $350,000 in high-interest debt. "He has been busy," Jamal murmured, pulling up the withdrawal ledgers attached to the commercial loan. "He has completely maxed out this credit line over the last 4 months. He is pulling cash in large randomized increments." My father stood rigidly beside me, his hands planted firmly on the desk. "He is setting you up for financial slaughter, Naomi. This is a classic exit strategy. He intends to file for divorce. When he does, he will conveniently discover this failing business venture attached entirely to your name. He has legally insulated himself from the debt burden. He plans to walk away from this marriage clean, leaving you bankrupt and legally responsible for a fraudulent loan. You would spend the next 20 years paying off the debt he accumulated to fund his new life." The sheer scale of his sociopathy was breathtaking. He did not just want to leave me for Riley. He wanted to strip me of the financial power that he had secretly resented for 10 years. He wanted me broken, destitute, and drowning in corporate debt while he paraded around town as the newly promoted vice president of sales at Zenith Tech. I closed my eyes for a brief second. I visualized the ledger in my mind. I saw the columns of stolen money, the forged signatures, and the arrogant, deceitful smile he had flashed me in our kitchen just hours ago. When I opened my eyes, the last remaining shred of the woman who had loved Carter was entirely dead. I was now operating purely as an auditor preparing a lethal execution. "Trace the incoming cash flow." "Jamal," I commanded, my voice resonating with cold, unyielding authority. "A commercial loan of this size requires a verified income stream to secure the initial underwriting. Carter had to show the bank that NC Holdings was generating actual revenue. Where is the seed money coming from?" Jamal nodded, minimizing the loan documents and pulling up the primary transaction logs for the shell company. "I am running a reverse trace on the initial deposit routing numbers right now. He needs clean capital to mask the debt withdrawals." We stared at the screen as the system processed the complex financial web. The routing data parsed through several proxy servers before finally locking onto a definitive source origin. The screen flashed, displaying the corporate identity attached to the incoming funds. It was not a random investment firm. It was not a private client. I felt a sharp, dangerous smile spread slowly across my face as I read the name of the originating bank account. "Well, well," I whispered, the final puzzle piece locking firmly into place. "My cheating husband is not just defrauding me, he is stealing from his boss." The screen illuminated the Zenith Tech corporate logo, right beside a series of massive outgoing wire transfers. Jamal tapped his finger against the edge of his laptop monitor, his eyes tracking the flow of capital with the intensity of a seasoned investigator. "Look at the vendor payout codes," Jamal instructed, highlighting a specific column in the data stream. "Zenith Tech is authorizing monthly payments to NC Holdings for what is listed as regional marketing analysis and client acquisition consulting. Carter is the senior sales director. He controls the discretionary promotional budgets for his entire division. He is generating fake invoices from the shell company he created in your name, approving those invoices himself at the corporate level, and funneling his employer's money directly into the LLC. My father leaned over the desk, his judicial mind dissecting the legal mechanics of the crime. So he is manufacturing legitimate-looking revenue, Richard noted. By feeding stolen corporate funds into NC Holdings, he creates a verifiable income stream. That is exactly how he convinced the commercial bank to underwrite a $350,000 line of credit in Naomi's name. The bank saw consistent corporate deposits from a major tech firm and approved the loan without a second thought. It is a classic double-dip operation, I said, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline masking the lingering sting of betrayal. He is embezzling directly from Zenith Tech to build a fake revenue history, which he then leverages to steal even more money from the bank, using my stolen identity. But where is the physical capital going? You do not just leave $500,000 sitting in a commercial checking account if you are planning an exit strategy. He has to be washing it into a hard asset. Jamal cracked his neck, his fingers returning to the keyboard. Let us follow the outflow. He cannot use a direct wire transfer to buy an asset without exposing the shell company. He has to layer it again. We watched the screen as Jamal traced the outgoing funds from NC Holdings. The money was being rapidly drained in staggered amounts, transferred into a completely separate legal entity. It was a blind trust registered under a completely different corporate proxy service. He is moving the combined stolen funds and the bank loan capital into this blind trust, Jamal explained, running a reverse search on the trust's registration details. Give me a second to bypass the proxy shield and access the county property records. If he bought real estate, the county tax assessor will have the deed recorded under the trust's name. The study remained absolutely silent. I could hear the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room. I was watching my husband's financial guillotine being built right in front of me. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of sharing my life, my bed and my dreams with a man who was meticulously constructing a trapdoor beneath my feet. Got it, Jamal announced, his voice sharp and triumphant. The Blind Trust recently finalized a cash purchase for a luxury residential property. It is a top-floor penthouse located on West 5th Avenue. That perfectly matches the localized GPS telemetry data we pulled from his secret burner phone. He has been spending his evenings there. Pull up the homeowner association records or the utility registrations, I directed, my voice completely devoid of emotion. A blind trust can hide the deed owner, but the building management still requires a named resident for security and utility billing. Let us see exactly who is enjoying the view from the top floor. Jamal executed another localized breach accessing the property management database for the luxury building. The resident directory popped onto the screen. There it is, Jamal stated, highlighting the resident file for the penthouse unit. The primary resident listed on the utility accounts and building security access is Riley. Helen let out a sharp breath from the leather sofa. He bought his 24-year-old assistant a luxury penthouse with stolen money, she said, her voice dripping with maternal fury. It is worse than that, Mom, I replied, staring at the screen with absolute terrifying clarity. He did not just buy her a penthouse, he bought it using a combination of money he embezzled from his employer and a fraudulent loan he secured using my identity. Do you see his master plan? When he is finally ready to leave me, he stops feeding the shell company. The commercial loan defaults. The bank comes after the primary guarantor, which is me. I get hit with a $350,000 debt. But the absolute worst part is the corporate embezzlement. My father nodded grimly, perfectly understanding the catastrophic legal trap Carter had set. When Zenith Tech inevitably audits their marketing budget and discovers the missing funds, they will trace the fake vendor invoices directly back to NC Holdings. They will look at the corporate registrations, see your forged signature as the primary shareholder, and accuse you of the theft. Exactly, I said, my blood running cold at the sheer calculated malice of the man I had married. Carter intends to walk away clean. He would claim he had absolutely no idea his accountant wife was running a sophisticated financial fraud operation behind his back. He would play the devastated, betrayed husband. I would go to federal prison for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud, completely ruined and disgraced. Meanwhile, he and Riley would be sitting in a fully paid luxury penthouse, living off the assets he managed to wash through the blind trust. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. My father took a slow, deep breath, his eyes blazing with a protective judicial wrath. He crossed the line from being a cheating husband to being a federal criminal, Richard said, his tone resolute and dangerous. He has handed us the exact weapon we need to completely annihilate him. We are not just filing for divorce, Naomi. We are building a criminal indictment. Jamal downloaded the property deeds, the utility registrations, and the final routing numbers, locking them behind heavy military-grade encryption on his external drive. He has no idea we can see him, Jamal said. He thinks he is a ghost. He is a ghost, I replied, my voice steady and hard. Because by the time Friday night arrives, Carter will be completely dead to the corporate world. We have the motive, we have the method, and we have the money trail. Now I need to make sure he cannot use any of his remaining leverage against me before the trap snaps shut. My father stood up, walking around his massive desk to stand beside me. Tomorrow you have to look him in the eye and pretend nothing has changed. Can you do it? I looked at the digital records of my husband's betrayal, the undeniable proof of his sociopathic greed. I will smile, I will pour his coffee, and I will be the perfect, obedient wife I promised. Because every second he believes he is winning is a second he moves closer to his own absolute destruction. Wednesday evening arrived with a heavy, stifling tension that hung in the air of our suburban home like a physical weight. I was standing at the kitchen island meticulously chopping vegetables for a salad, perfectly embodying the role of the devoted, supportive wife. The garage door rumbled open right on schedule. Carter walked through the interior door a moment later, loosening his expensive silk tie and letting out a loud theatrical sigh of exhaustion. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the granite counter with a heavy thud and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He was playing a character, and I was his captive audience. "Hey, honey," I said, turning to him with a bright, welcoming smile. "You look completely drained. Is everything okay at the office?" Carter leaned against the counter and rubbed his temples, projecting the image of a deeply stressed corporate executive carrying the weight of the world on his broad shoulders. "It is just HR being an absolute nightmare about this promotion," he complained, his voice laced with manufactured frustration. "Zenith Tech is overhauling all of their compliance protocols for senior leadership. Because I am moving up to the vice president tier, they are requiring a full financial background check. They are suddenly treating me like I am applying for a federal security clearance instead of a sales promotion." I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked over to him, placing a gentle, comforting hand on his arm. "That sounds incredibly stressful, Carter. Is there anything I can do to help speed up the process?" He offered me a weak, grateful smile, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila folder and slid it across the smooth granite surface toward me. "Actually, there is one minor thing. The compliance department needs an updated spousal financial disclosure on file since we submit our taxes jointly. It is standard bureaucratic garbage, just verifying that we do not have any massive undisclosed debt liabilities that could compromise my executive standing. I need your signature on the last 2 pages so I can hand it to the legal team first thing tomorrow morning." I looked down at the folder. My heart maintained a steady rhythmic beat. I did not panic. I did not flinch. I opened the folder and stared at the documents he had placed in front of me. To the untrained eye of an average spouse, the paperwork looked incredibly boring. It was filled with dense, tiny print formatted with standard corporate headers and generic legal jargon. It looked exactly like the kind of mind-numbing administrative paperwork a human resources department would demand before a major promotion. But I was not an average spouse. I was a senior forensic auditor. My brain naturally parsed through the legal formatting, stripping away the visual noise to isolate the core financial mechanics of the contract. I skimmed past the first page, my eyes zeroing in on the dense paragraphs buried in the middle of the second sheet. This was not a Zenith Tech corporate disclosure form. It was a master promissory note cleverly disguised with a fake cover sheet. Buried in subsection C of the 4th paragraph was a comprehensive indemnification clause. The legal phrasing explicitly bound the signatory as the primary guarantor for the commercial line of credit attached to NC Holdings. He had slipped a legally binding debt acknowledgement into a stack of fake human resources paperwork. If I signed my legal name on that dotted line, I would officially irrevocably own the $350,000 of high-interest commercial debt he had generated to buy a luxury penthouse for his 24-year-old mistress. I would be trapped. I would lose my home, my savings, and my credit score in one single stroke of a pen. Carter hovered right over my shoulder, tapping his fingers nervously against the countertop. His proximity was a deliberate intimidation tactic designed to rush me through the reading process. He wanted me to feel pressured to simply sign the paper to alleviate his manufactured stress without actually reading the fine print. "Just sign right there at the bottom, babe," he urged, pointing to the designated line. "I am so sorry to dump this on you right before dinner, but the legal department is breathing down my neck, and I want to have a completely clear schedule so we can just focus on celebrating at the gala on Friday night. What dress are you planning to wear, by the way?" He was deploying a classic diversion technique, trying to shift my brain from analytical processing to social planning. It was a textbook psychological manipulation, and it was deeply insulting that he thought it would actually work on me. "I will probably wear the emerald gown you bought me for our anniversary," I replied casually, picking up the pen. I held the ballpoint over the paper, my mind flashing back to the secure meeting in my father's study the night before. Richard had anticipated this exact scenario. My father had spent 40 years in family court, watching deceitful spouses try to manipulate assets before filing for divorce. He had explicitly instructed me on how to handle forced signatures. A contract is only legally binding if the signature represents the true legal identity and intent of the signatory. I pressed the pen to the paper. I did not sign Naomi Hayes, my current legal married name. Instead, I signed using my maiden name, Naomi Brooks. But I did not stop there. I intentionally misspelled my own middle initial, changing an A to an E. Furthermore, I completely altered the physical structure of my handwriting, utilizing a specific blocky cursive style that exactly matched a voided expired state identification card I had reported stolen over 8 years ago. My father had kept a copy of that voided signature in his legal archives for precisely this kind of emergency. The signature I left on that fraudulent promissory note looked entirely authentic at a quick glance, but it held absolutely zero binding legal power in any court in the United States. It was a phantom signature belonging to a person who did not legally exist. "There you go," I said brightly, closing the folder and sliding it back across the kitchen island toward him. "All signed and ready for human resources. I hope this gets the legal department off your back, honey." Carter grabbed the folder with an eagerness he could barely conceal. He flipped to the back page, his eyes locking onto the ink on the dotted line. A wave of profound, absolute relief washed over his handsome face. He let out a long breath, the tension melting from his shoulders. In his arrogant sociopathic mind, he had just won the entire war. He truly believed he had just successfully chained me to his massive financial crimes, ensuring his own clean getaway. "You are the absolute best, Naomi," he said, pulling me into a tight embrace and kissing my cheek. "I owe you big time. I promise after this promotion goes through on Friday, everything is going to change for us." I rested my chin on his shoulder, staring blankly at the kitchen wall. I felt the cold, hard steel of my resolve solidify in my chest. "You are absolutely right, Carter," I whispered softly against his expensive shirt. "Everything is going to change." Thursday morning arrived with a cold, biting rain that perfectly matched my internal disposition. While Carter was busy at his Zenith Tech office, blissfully believing he had successfully shackled me to a mountain of fraudulent commercial debt, I was sitting across from my father in his heavy wood-paneled study. Richard sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a thick stack of legal documents spread out before him. The retired judge was in his absolute element. "Today, Naomi, we are going to make you completely disappear on paper," my father announced, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. "In the eyes of the family court system, you are about to become a financial ghost." I took the pen, feeling the weight of the moment. My father had spent 40 years presiding over vicious divorce settlements, watching greedy spouses attempt to bleed their partners dry. He knew every single loophole, every hidden clause, and every defensive maneuver in the legal playbook. And he was about to unleash his entire arsenal to protect my hard-earned capital from the man I had married. First, we sever the legitimate joint accounts, Richard explained, sliding a formal bank transfer authorization across the desk. I have already drafted the operational directives. You are going to transfer the entirety of your personal savings, your accumulated corporate bonuses, and your independent stock portfolios into a newly established irrevocable blind trust. I reviewed the paperwork carefully, my forensic auditor instincts evaluating the structure. The trust was constructed brilliantly. Once the funds were transferred, they legally ceased to be my direct personal assets. They would be managed by an independent trustee, placing them entirely out of the jurisdiction of any standard divorce proceeding or debt collection agency. But will Carter not notice the missing money? I asked, signing the transfer authorization with my actual legally binding signature. He monitors those accounts to ensure he has enough cover for his embezzlement scheme. Richard offered a sharp, predatory smile. He will not notice a thing because Jamal is currently executing a localized digital mirror on Carter's banking application. Whenever Carter checks the joint accounts on his personal phone, he will see a cached, frozen snapshot of the balances from 3 days ago. By the time he logs into a clean terminal and realizes the actual vaults are completely empty, he will already be sitting in police custody. I marveled at the sheer coordination of our alliance. Jamal, my brilliant African-American brother-in-law, was ensuring our absolute digital supremacy while my father constructed an impenetrable legal fortress. We had covered every conceivable angle of attack. Next, Richard slid a property deed modification toward me. This concerns the primary residence you share with Carter. You paid the primary down payment, but his name is on the deed as a joint tenant with right of survivorship. We are going to break that tenancy right now. My father pointed to the signature block. By filing a quitclaim deed transferring your half of the equity to a secondary holding entity that my law firm manages, we instantly convert the property status to a tenancy in common. What does that actually achieve? I asked, eager to absorb his tactical masterclass in asset protection. It means Carter can no longer leverage the entire property for a secondary line of credit without your explicit, physically verified presence in front of a neutral notary. My father stated, his tone ringing with absolute authority. It also means if he tries to force a fast sale during the divorce proceedings to liquidate cash, the holding entity can legally tie the property up in administrative litigation for years. We will bleed his legal resources entirely dry before he sees a single dime from that house. He wanted to play games with commercial real estate, so we are taking the entire board away from him. I signed the quitclaim deed, feeling a profound sense of liberation with every stroke of the pen. I was systematically dismantling the financial infrastructure of my toxic marriage, severing the heavy chains Carter thought he had wrapped around my neck. You have worked 60-hour weeks for 10 years, Naomi, my father said softly, his stern judicial demeanor cracking just enough to show his fierce paternal love. You built a sterling reputation as a top-tier auditor. I will be absolutely damned if I let an arrogant, manipulative coward steal your future to finance a luxury downtown penthouse for his 24-year-old assistant. We spent the next 3 hours signing, sealing, and aggressively filing paperwork. Every single dollar I had ever earned was meticulously shielded behind layers of corporate protections and legal trusts. My retirement accounts were heavily fortified. My independent investments were locked away. On paper, I was left with a modest checking account that held just enough cash to cover basic monthly groceries. If Carter's shell company defaulted and the creditors came looking for the primary guarantor he had falsely named, they would find absolutely nothing to seize. I set the gold fountain pen down on the mahogany desk, my hands slightly cramped, but my spirit soaring. I looked at the towering stacks of executed documents. We had effectively neutralized Carter's entire exit strategy. He thought he was walking away with my wealth, but he was actually walking straight off a financial cliff. The trap is officially set, Richard said, organizing the folders and placing them into his fireproof safe. The legal perimeter is fully secured. You are completely protected from the blast radius, Naomi. Now we just need to execute the final offensive maneuvers before the corporate gala tomorrow night. I nodded, standing up from the leather chair. My posture was perfectly straight, my mind sharper than it had ever been. There was one final loose end tying me to his toxic family, and it was time to sever it with extreme prejudice. I will handle his mother, I said, my voice cold and resolute. She thinks she can cover for his affairs while sitting comfortably in a house I pay for. I am going to show Brenda exactly what happens when the boring accountant decides to stop crunching the numbers and starts destroying them. I left my father's study with a clear, singular objective burning in my mind. The rain continued to lash against my windshield as I drove straight into the heart of the downtown financial district. Carter thought he was a masterful manipulator, but he fundamentally misunderstood how money actually worked. He viewed money as a tool for buying luxury, securing mistresses, and projecting status. I viewed money as a highly sensitive, interconnected grid. If you sever the right power line, the entire grid collapses into absolute darkness. 3 years ago, when Carter's father passed away, leaving behind a mountain of undisclosed debt, Brenda was on the verge of losing her sprawling faux colonial home. Carter was devastated, but his credit was already overextended from his lavish lifestyle choices. I was the one who stepped in to save her. I used my pristine credit score to secure a new mortgage entirely in my name. We set up a specific joint account dedicated solely to paying that mortgage, an account that I funded with my quarterly auditing bonuses. Brenda lived in that house under the explicit legal reality that I was her landlord, her benefactor, and her financial savior. Yet she spent the last 3 years mocking my career, calling me a dry, boring accountant, and actively providing cover for her son to sleep with a 24-year-old assistant. She bit the exact hand that kept a roof over her ungrateful head. Now it was time to amputate that hand completely. I walked into the massive glass lobby of the Central Commercial Bank. I bypassed the standard teller lines and walked directly to the executive suites on the second floor. I had a scheduled appointment with the senior branch manager, a sharp, fiercely competent woman named Diane, who had handled my corporate accounts for over a decade. Diane stood up from behind her polished desk, extending a warm hand. "Naomi, it is always a pleasure to see you. How can I help you restructure today?" I took a seat in the plush leather chair across from her. I placed my sleek briefcase on the desk and extracted the original deed and mortgage agreements for Brenda's property. I slid the documents across the table. "I need to execute a hard severance on account ending in 4829, I stated calmly. "I want the automatic withdrawal mandate permanently revoked effective immediately." Diane adjusted her glasses, reviewing the paperwork. "That is the holding account for the suburban property." She noted her professional tone masking a slight hint of confusion. "Naomi, if you sever the auto pay, the mortgage will draw directly from the account balance. I am looking at the ledger right now, and this account has been severely depleted over the last 8 months. There are insufficient funds to cover the upcoming billing cycle. The property will instantly go into default." "I know," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of hesitation. "My husband has been secretly draining that account to fund an illicit relationship. I am no longer willing to subsidize the property. Let the account hit zero." Diane looked up, her eyes widening in immediate understanding and deep professional sympathy. She did not ask invasive questions. She recognized the cold, hard reality of financial betrayal. "I am incredibly sorry you are dealing with this, Naomi. I will execute the severance immediately. But you are the primary guarantor on this loan. If it defaults, it will trigger a foreclosure protocol that could impact your newly insulated credit shields. That is exactly why I am invoking the acceleration clause," I explained, leaning forward. "According to subsection D of my original lending agreement, if the marital asset structure undergoes a hostile reorganization, I have the right to demand the immediate full maturation of the outstanding loan balance. I am officially triggering that clause today. I am selling the debt back to the bank." Diane paused, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and terrifying respect. "If you invoke the acceleration clause and relinquish the debt back to the institution, we are legally required to issue an immediate demand for payment in full to the current occupants. When they inevitably fail to produce the capital, we initiate an expedited foreclosure. We will serve a 30-day notice to vacate the premises by the end of business today. Print the authorization forms, Diane, I commanded softly. The printer whirred into action. I sat in that quiet executive office and felt a profound, chilling sense of vindication wash over me. Brenda and Cynthia had sat in that opulent dining room drinking expensive wine, laughing about my replacement and mocking my devotion to corporate rules. They felt utterly untouchable because they believed my money would always flow like a reliable, silent river. They never once considered that the boring accountant had the power to turn off the water and let them die of thirst. Diane handed me the documents. I signed my name with sharp, aggressive strokes. I was not just severing a financial tie. I was severing my tolerance for abuse. I was cutting away the toxic rot that had infected my life for a decade. The bank will dispatch a courier to serve the legal notice of default and foreclosure to the property address this afternoon, Diane confirmed, placing the official bank seal on the finalized documents. The occupants will be legally mandated to vacate. Carter will be notified as the secondary contact on file, but since he lacks the capital to cover the accelerated loan balance, there is absolutely nothing he can do to stop the eviction process. Thank you, Diane, I said, standing up and shaking her hand. Your efficiency is always appreciated. I walked out of the bank and back into the biting rain. The cold air felt bracing, clean, and incredibly purifying. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and watched the city traffic move around me. In a few hours, a courier would knock on Brenda's heavy oak door. She would open it, expecting a package or a delivery, and instead, she would be handed the immediate destruction of her comfortable, entitled life. She would call Carter in a blind panic. Carter would look at his drained bank accounts, the very accounts he had emptied to buy diamond necklaces and luxury hotel rooms for Riley, and he would realize he was completely powerless to save his mother from the street. He would scramble. He would sweat. He would desperately try to find a solution, all while believing he still had me completely fooled. He would have to walk into the Zenith Tech corporate gala tomorrow night wearing a tailored tuxedo, smiling for the cameras knowing his mother was being evicted and his finances were collapsing. I started the engine of my car. I had successfully dismantled his safe haven. Now it was time to finalize the digital kill shot. I pulled out my secure phone and sent a brief encrypted message to Jamal. The physical assets are locked and the eviction is in motion, I typed. I am heading back to the house now. I need the final piece of the puzzle. I need the definitive IP trace linking his corporate theft directly to his promotion. Jamal replied instantly. I have got him dead to rights, Naomi. Come get the weapon. I smiled, shifting the car into gear. The trap was fully set, the exits were barricaded, and the predator was completely surrounded. All that was left was to drop the match and watch the entire toxic empire burn to the ground. I pulled up to my parents' house just as the rain began to clear, leaving behind a slick, reflective sheen on the asphalt. The drive had taken less than 20 minutes, but in my mind I had crossed an ocean. I walked through the front door and moved directly toward my father's study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, casting a wedge of pale blue light into the hallway. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Jamal was sitting exactly where I had left him the night before, surrounded by glowing monitors and the low hum of heavily encrypted processors. He looked up as I entered the blue light, reflecting off his sharp features. He did not offer a polite greeting or ask how my day went. We were far past social pleasantries. We were operatives finalizing a surgical strike. Have a seat, Naomi, Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a grim satisfaction. You are going to want to see this up close. I pulled up a chair and leaned over his primary monitor. The screen was a chaotic web of network logs, routing tables, and server directories. To anyone else, it would look like absolute gibberish. But Jamal navigated the digital architecture with frightening precision. Carter thought he was executing a flawless phantom protocol, Jamal explained, tapping a key to isolate a specific data stream. He was using a virtual private network to mask his location whenever he logged into the Zenith Tech financial portal. He assumed that by bouncing his connection through proxy servers in Switzerland and Singapore, he was effectively invisible to his employer's internal security team. But he made a mistake, I stated, knowing exactly how arrogant men operated. They always leave a loose thread because they underestimate the intelligence of the people around them. He made a massive, fatal mistake. Jamal confirmed, a sharp smile touching the corners of his mouth. A virtual private network only masks the external routing path. It does not hide the hardware identification number of the machine initiating the request. Carter was logging into the Zenith Tech vendor payment portal using his corporate-issued laptop. But he was authorizing the fraudulent wire transfers to NC Holdings while connected to a very specific unencrypted residential Wi-Fi network. I stared at the screen, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. Let me guess the location of that residential network. Jamal highlighted a string of IP addresses on the screen. It is the luxury penthouse on West 5th Avenue, the exact same penthouse he bought using the funds he embezzled. He was literally sitting in his mistress's living room drinking his employer's stolen money while using their own corporate portal to steal even more. I let out a harsh, breathless laugh. The sheer audacity was staggering. He was so incredibly comfortable in his deception that he did not even bother covering his tracks where it mattered most. But we need more than just a location ping, I said, shifting back into my forensic auditor mindset. A defense attorney could argue that someone hacked his laptop or that his device was stolen. We need absolute, undeniable proof of user intent. We need to tie his physical actions directly to the theft. Jamal leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. I know you are a perfectionist, Naomi. That is why I dug deeper. Look at the timestamp on this specific transfer authorization. He pointed to a massive outbound wire transfer of $85,000. The timestamp read last Thursday at 2:14 in the afternoon. Now, Jamal said, pulling up a completely different window. I managed to breach the internal physical security logs for the Zenith Tech Executive Building. Carter used his personalized radio frequency identification badge to access the secure server room on the 4th floor at exactly 2:10 that afternoon. He swiped out at 2:20. He was physically standing inside the restricted corporate finance room when that $85,000 transfer was initiated from his device. I felt a cold chill wash over my skin. That is the kill shot. He cannot claim his laptop was compromised by a remote hacker if the building's security system places his physical body alone inside the secure server room at the exact moment the embezzlement occurred. He bypassed the standard dual authorization protocol by physically logging into the primary administration terminal. Exactly, Jamal said, his eyes locking onto mine with fierce intensity. And I did not just find one instance. I found a documented pattern. Every single time a major wire transfer hit the NC Holdings shell company, Carter's security badge registered him alone in that server room. He was manually overriding the accounting safeguards to push the fake invoices through the system. I have compiled the security logs, the IP traces from Riley's penthouse, and the forged vendor contracts. The digital chain of custody is utterly flawless. He reached across the desk and handed me a small encrypted titanium hard drive. It felt heavy in my palm. This tiny piece of metal held the power to completely decimate a man's entire existence. Everything is on there, Jamal stated. The audio recordings, the offshore routing numbers, the forged promissory notes, and the corporate theft logs. I also compiled a clean, easy-to-read presentation deck. When you plug this into any standard projection system, it will automatically run a synchronized visual breakdown of his crimes. You will not need to explain the complex accounting to the board members. The presentation will brutally explain it for you. I looked at Jamal, feeling a profound wave of gratitude for the brilliant, protective man my sister had married. Thank you, Jamal. You have given me exactly what I need to take my life back. He offered a solemn nod. Men like Carter thrive in the dark, Naomi. They rely on the silence and the shame of the women they betray. Tomorrow night, you are going to shine a massive, blinding spotlight right into his eyes. Do not hesitate. I will not, I promise, slipping the titanium drive securely into my tailored pocket. I left my father's study and drove back to the suburban house I shared with a criminal. The storm clouds had completely broken, leaving the afternoon sky clear and stark. I walked through the front door and looked around the impeccably decorated living room. Carter had chosen the expensive leather sofas. He had selected the modern art hanging on the walls. He had curated this entire environment to project the image of a highly successful stableman. It was all a hollow, rotting theater set. I walked upstairs and opened my closet. The emerald gown hung in its protective garment bag, waiting for the Zenith Tech corporate gala. I reached out and ran my fingers along the smooth, cool fabric. Carter wanted me to wear this dress. He wanted me to stand quietly by his side, smiling for the cameras, playing the role of the boring, oblivious accountant while he accepted his crowning promotion. He had severely underestimated the woman he married. He thought he was bringing a compliant accessory to his coronation. He had no idea he had actually invited his own executioner. I closed the closet door and walked into the master bathroom to prepare. Tomorrow night, the entire corporate hierarchy of Zenith Tech was going to witness a financial crucifixion. Friday morning arrived with deceptive stillness. Heavy rain vanished, leaving streets bathed in sunlight. I woke before the alarm, eyes snapping open with clarity. Today was the day. I lay listening to the rhythmic breathing of the man sleeping beside me. Carter shifted under the duvet, unaware his life operated on a rapidly expiring countdown timer. He rolled over, stretched his arms, and offered a sleepy smile. "Big day today, babe," he murmured, his voice thick with arrogant satisfaction. "I have final meetings with the executive board this morning to iron out transition details. Then I will come home early to head to the Grand Hotel together." I smiled back, keeping my expression soft. "I am proud of you, Carter. You worked hard to get where you are today." He kissed my forehead and headed for the shower. I watched him walk away, feeling the cold titanium hard drive hidden inside my bedside drawer. He was right. He had worked hard to build his house of cards, and I was going to ensure he received the exact reward he earned. Once Carter left for the Zenith Tech offices, the house fell into heavy silence. I took the day off from my auditing firm, claiming I needed to prepare for his career milestone. In reality, I needed the day to mentally armor myself for the brutal execution I was about to perform. I spent the late morning sipping black coffee and running through the tactical checklist my father and Jamal built: offshore bank accounts identified, localized network maps secured, physical security logs placing Carter inside the server room during the embezzlement verified. The foreclosure notice was successfully served to Brenda exactly 24 hours ago. I checked my phone again. No missed calls from Brenda or Cynthia. They were likely furiously trying to reach Carter, panicking over the eviction mandate. Carter would be screening personal calls, too focused on impressing superiors to deal with his mother's crisis. He would assume it was a banking error he could fix after securing his vice president's salary. He had no idea the debt was real, and his safety net was gone. At 3, I walked upstairs to get ready. I opened my closet and unzipped the bag holding the emerald green backless gown. Carter purchased it months ago, insisting the color complemented his tailored tuxedo. He viewed me as a prop and accessory designed to stand quietly by his side. Tonight, the prop was going to completely shatter the entire stage. I took my time with hair and makeup. I applied a bold, sharp red lipstick, stepping away from the muted tones I usually wore for corporate audits. I swept my dark hair into an elegant, severe twist, leaving my neck bare. I was not dressing for a celebration. I was dressing for a corporate slaughter. Carter arrived home before 5, his hurried footsteps taking the stairs 2 at a time. He burst into the bedroom, flushed with adrenaline. "Are you almost ready?" he demanded, tearing off his tie. "My phone has been ringing all afternoon. My mother is having a hysterical meltdown about a bank notice. I told her I would handle it tomorrow. We need to leave in 45 minutes. The board members are arriving early." I stood in front of the vanity mirror, calmly fastening a gold clasp around my wrist. "I am perfectly ready, Carter. Take your time. We will not be late for your big moment." He rushed into the master bathroom, turning the shower on full blast. I walked over to his discarded suit jacket resting on the armchair. His personal cell phone was sticking out of the breast pocket. The screen lit up with an incoming text message. I glanced down. It was from Riley. "Cannot wait to see you tonight, handsome. Wearing the special gift you bought me. See you at the Champagne Tower." I stared at the glowing screen, my heart beating with a very slow, terrifying rhythm. She was going to wear the $40,000 diamond necklace purchased with stolen corporate funds to a company event swarming with the very same executives Carter had robbed. The arrogance of their affair was almost poetic. They were wrapping the murder weapon right around her neck. When Carter emerged from the bathroom dressed in his custom-tailored tuxedo, he looked at me and actually paused. For a brief second, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face. "You look absolutely stunning, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth tone he used to charm clients. "You are going to be the most beautiful woman in that ballroom tonight." I picked up my structured clutch purse. I had already slipped Jamal's encrypted titanium hard drive securely inside the inner pocket. "Thank you, Carter," I replied, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "But tonight is not about me. Tonight is entirely about you. Everyone is going to see exactly who you really are." He smiled, missing the lethal promise hidden inside my words. "That is exactly what I am hoping for, babe. Let us go secure our future." We walked out of the house and climbed into his luxury sedan. The drive to the Grand Hotel was filled with Carter's endless narcissistic monologues. He talked about his planned corporate restructuring, his new budget authority, and how he intended to dominate the regional sales divisions. He laid out his grand vision for the next 5 years, completely oblivious to the fact that his future would be measured in federal prison sentences, not fiscal quarters. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving the pavement shining under the street lamps. I did not interrupt him. I did not offer any words of encouragement. I simply listened to the dead man talking. As we pulled up to the valet stand at the Grand Hotel, a swarm of photographers and corporate guests milled around the red carpet entrance. Carter handed the keys to the valet, adjusted his bow tie, and walked around the car to open my door. He offered me his arm, projecting the ultimate image of a devoted husband. I took his arm, my posture perfectly rigid, my face molded into an expression of flawless, terrifying calm. The storm had finally arrived, and I was bringing the lightning. I stepped through the massive brass doors of the Grand Hotel and into the main ballroom. The sheer scale of the Zenith Tech corporate gala was staggering. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glittering light over hundreds of executives dressed in high-end tuxedos and designer gowns. Waitstaff navigated the crowded room carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and delicate appetizers. The room buzzed with the low, steady hum of corporate networking and performative laughter. Carter immediately shifted into his element. He released my arm and began working the room, shaking hands, patting shoulders, and accepting early congratulations from his colleagues. I maintained a quiet, measured distance, holding my clutch purse tightly against my side. Inside that small silk bag rested the encrypted titanium hard drive containing the absolute destruction of my husband's life. I scanned the perimeter of the ballroom, mapping the exits, locating the main audiovisual control booth, situated at the back of the hall, and identifying the key players in my upcoming presentation. My eyes locked onto a familiar, deeply unpleasant sight near the grand ice sculpture. Brenda and Cynthia were standing together, holding completely full wine glasses and surveying the crowd with supreme arrogance. Brenda wore a severe silver dress that highlighted her rigid posture, while Cynthia was squeezed into a tight black gown that looked incredibly uncomfortable. As soon as Brenda spotted Carter, she pushed past two junior executives and threw her arms around him. "Look at our future Vice President," Brenda exclaimed loudly, making absolutely sure the surrounding executives heard her. "You look incredibly handsome, Carter. This entire night belongs to you. You have carried this company on your shoulders for years." Carter offered his signature humble smile, kissing his mother on the cheek. "Thank you, Mom. I am just glad you and Sin could be here to share this milestone." Brenda finally turned her attention to me, her eyes sweeping up and down my emerald gown with obvious disdain. "Naomi, you actually dressed up for once. I am incredibly surprised you did not wear one of your boring gray accounting suits. Tonight is a very high society crowd. Try to just smile and let Carter do the talking." We do not want to bore the board members with discussions about tax codes and spreadsheets. Cynthia snickered, taking a large gulp of her wine. Just stand near the buffet, Naomi. Carter needs to network with the real visionaries tonight. I looked directly into Brenda's eyes, keeping my expression perfectly placid. I promise you, Brenda, I will not bore anyone tonight. I actually have a very exciting presentation planned. And please enjoy the champagne. You should savor every single moment of this luxurious evening. Brenda frowned, slightly confused by my lack of defensiveness, but Carter quickly whisked them away to introduce them to a regional director. I remained standing near the edge of the dance floor, my gaze sweeping the room once more. That is when I finally spotted her. Riley was standing near the VIP bar, holding a clipboard against her chest to maintain the flimsy illusion that she was there in an official administrative capacity. She wore a completely inappropriate slinky red dress that violated every standard of corporate event attire. But it was not the dress that made my blood run cold. It was the jewelry. Resting perfectly against her collarbone was the $40,000 diamond necklace. The diamonds caught the light from the chandeliers, sparkling with stolen brilliance. It was a massive, intricate piece, far too expensive for a 24-year-old assistant to afford on a base salary. It was the exact necklace Jamal had found the receipt for in Carter's hidden email archive. The necklace paid for with money embezzled directly from Zenith Tech marketing accounts. Riley caught Carter's eye across the room. She offered him a sultry, secretive smile, completely ignoring the fact that his wife was standing less than 40 feet away. Carter subtly adjusted his tie and offered her a quick, arrogant wink in return. They were utterly fearless. They genuinely believed they were the smartest people in the room, flaunting their illicit affair and their stolen wealth right under the noses of the executives they were robbing. I felt a sharp, dangerous calm settle deep into my bones. I did not feel a single ounce of jealousy looking at Riley. I looked at her and saw a walking, breathing piece of forensic evidence. She had practically wrapped the murder weapon directly around her own neck. I turned my attention to the back of the ballroom. I needed to confirm my own backup had arrived. Standing near the massive double doors blending perfectly into the crowd of security personnel and event staff were my father and Jamal. Richard stood tall and imposing in a dark suit, his judicial authority radiating even from a distance. Jamal stood beside him, looking sharp and alert, carrying a sleek black laptop bag over his shoulder. Jamal, my African-American brother-in-law, had proven to be the ultimate weapon in this digital war. He tapped his smartwatch, signaling to me that the remote uplink was active. I caught my father's eye. Richard gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. The perimeter was secured. Jamal had already bypassed the hotel's wireless network and established a direct override protocol with the main projection system behind the stage. We were fully armed and waiting for the signal. A loud chime rang through the ballroom, cutting over the networking chatter. The chief executive officer of Zenith Tech, an imposing no-nonsense man named Mr. Kensington, stepped up to the podium on the main stage. He tapped the microphone, bringing the entire room to a hushed, respectful silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Kensington's voice echoed through the massive speakers, "please take your seats. Tonight we are here to celebrate innovation, dedication, and the future of Zenith Tech. We are here to honor a man who has supposedly set new standards for our sales division." I walked slowly toward the front table, taking my seat right next to Carter. Brenda and Cynthia sat on his other side, beaming with absolute unearned pride. Carter reached under the table and placed his hand over mine, giving it a tight, confident squeeze. "This is it, babe," Carter whispered, leaning close to my ear. "The moment everything changes for us." I looked at the stage, feeling the cold titanium drive in my clutch. I pulled my hand away from his, resting it calmly in my lap. "Yes, Carter," I replied softly, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. "This is the exact moment you get everything you deserve." Mr. Kensington adjusted his notes on the podium. "Before we officially announce the new vice president of sales, I want to talk about trust. Trust is the foundation of this corporation. When we elevate an employee to the executive board, we entrust them with our reputation, our capital, and our future." I opened my clutch. I wrapped my fingers around the hard drive. The trap was ready to snap shut and Carter was completely, hopelessly exposed. Mr. Kensington looked out over the crowded ballroom and smiled. Tonight we elevate a man who exemplifies our core values. He has driven our quarterly margins to record-breaking heights, and he has proven that aggressive market strategy can coexist with absolute corporate integrity. Please join me in welcoming the new Vice President of Sales, Carter Hayes. The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Brenda shrieked with joy beside me, throwing her arms up in the air. Cynthia pounded her hands on the table, her face flushed with cheap wine and unearned pride. Carter stood up, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket with a practiced, effortless motion. He looked down at me, offering a patronizing wink before turning to bask in the adulation of his peers. He waved to the crowd, shaking hands with senior partners as he made his way to the stage. I watched his back, feeling the sharp, heavy edges of the titanium drive pressing into my palm. Carter practically floated up the carpeted stairs to the podium. He shook Mr. Kensington's hand firmly, accepting a heavy glass award plaque. He stepped up to the microphone and the room slowly quieted down. The spotlight hit his face, illuminating the exact arrogant smirk I had grown to despise. "Thank you, Mr. Kensington." Carter began, his voice echoing smoothly through the massive speakers. "I stand before you tonight incredibly humbled. Success is never built in a vacuum. It requires immense sacrifice, transparent communication, and a profound commitment to doing what is right even when no one is watching." I felt my jaw tighten. The sheer audacity of his words was almost artistic. He was standing on a stage preaching about transparency while his mistress stood 40 feet away, wearing $40,000 of stolen corporate capital around her neck. But more than anything, Carter continued, sweeping his gaze across the room. "I want to thank my family. To my mother, Brenda, who taught me the value of relentless ambition. To my sister, Cynthia, who always kept me grounded. And of course, to my beautiful wife, Naomi." He gestured toward our table. The spotlight swung wildly, momentarily blinding me. Hundreds of executives turned to look in my direction, clapping politely. I did not smile, I did not wave. I remained perfectly still, holding his gaze with a cold, dead stare. Carter faltered for a fraction of a second, his charismatic smile twitching at the edges as he noticed my icy expression. But he quickly recovered, pivoting his attention smoothly toward the VIP bar area. I watched his eyes lock directly onto Riley. "I also want to thank my incredibly dedicated support team," Carter added, his voice dropping into a softer, more intimate register. "Those who work tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring our operations run flawlessly. Your dedication does not go unnoticed. We are building a brilliant future together." Riley bit her lower lip, her hand flying up to touch the diamond necklace resting against her chest. She looked like she might melt right there on the carpet. It was a sickening private exchange disguised as corporate gratitude. Carter turned back to Mr. Kensington, wrapping up his speech with a booming declaration. "I promise this board of directors that I will treat this new position with the utmost respect. I will protect this company's assets as fiercely as I protect my own. Thank you." The applause swelled again. Mr. Kensington stepped forward to shake Carter's hand one final time to make the promotion completely official. This was the exact precise moment my father had instructed me to seize. The moment of maximum elevation right before the fall. I stood up. I did not rush. I pushed my chair back, letting the legs scrape loudly against the polished marble floor. The sharp sound cut through the dying applause. Brenda grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. "What are you doing, Naomi?" Brenda hissed under her breath. "Sit down. You are going to ruin his moment." I looked down at my mother-in-law, pulling my arm out of her grip with a swift, aggressive motion. "I am going to make his moment unforgettable, Brenda." I turned and walked purposefully down the center aisle of the ballroom. My emerald gown trailed behind me, my heels clicking in a slow, steady rhythm. The crowd began to murmur. Executives leaned across their tables, confused by the sudden, unscripted interruption. Carter noticed my approach. He froze on the stage, his hand still gripping the glass award. The confident glow completely vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, creeping panic. "Naomi," he said softly, stepping away from the podium, His voice carried faintly without the microphone. "What are you doing?" I reached the base of the stage and walked up the carpeted stairs without breaking my stride. Mr. Kensington looked utterly bewildered, taking a step back as I approached the center podium. Carter tried to intercept me, wrapping a firm warning hand around my elbow. "Babe, you need to sit down," Carter whispered frantically, his teeth clenched into a forced smile for the audience. "You are embarrassing me. Go back to the table right now." I ripped my elbow out of his grasp and stepped directly up to the microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the local tech industry were staring up at me, waiting to see what the new vice president's wife was going to say. I spotted my father, Richard, standing by the emergency exit doors. He gave me a single firm nod. Jamal stood beside him, his laptop open, running the direct override protocol to the main projection screens behind us. "Good evening, everyone!" My voice boomed through the speakers, clear and razor-sharp. I apologize for the unscripted interruption, but I felt compelled to add a few words to my husband's beautiful speech about transparency and protecting corporate assets. Carter lunged toward the microphone, but Mr. Kensington held up his hand, stopping him. The CEO was a man who smelled trouble, and his instincts were telling him to let the scene play out. "My husband is a very modest man," I continued, my tone laced with lethal calm. "He failed to mention the true extent of his recent financial operations. You see, I am a certified forensic auditor. I spend my life tracking hidden data and exposing structural liabilities. So, as a special gift to celebrate Carter's promotion, I decided to conduct a comprehensive independent audit of his sales division over the past 8 months." The entire ballroom went dead silent. The faint clinking of glasses ceased entirely. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the encrypted titanium hard drive, holding it up for the entire executive board to see. Carter's face drained of all color. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows, hearing the lever pull. "Naomi, stop!" He choked out, his voice shaking with absolute terror. "Please do not do this." I turned to look at the man who had lied to my face, betrayed my trust, and tried to ruin my financial future. "I am just protecting the assets, Carter. Just like you promised." I handed the titanium drive to Mr. Kensington. The CEO took it with a grave expression, sensing the immense gravity of the object. I turned back to the microphone, my eyes locking onto the massive digital screens hanging behind the stage, ready to deliver the final lethal blow. I raised my hand and gave a subtle, definitive nod toward the back of the ballroom. Jamal did not hesitate for a single second. He engaged the remote override protocol. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered violently, immediately replacing the Zenith Tech corporate logo with a high-resolution photograph. A collective echoing gasp rippled through the entire audience. Projected at 20 feet tall was a crystal-clear image of Carter passionately kissing Riley by baggage claim number 4 at the international terminal. The digital timestamp glowing in the bottom right corner displayed last Friday at 5:15 in the evening. Carter stumbled backward as if physically struck his hip, hitting the wooden podium. He stared at the giant image of himself, his mouth opening and closing in sheer, unadulterated panic. The microphone caught his ragged breathing, broadcasting his terror to the silent room. My husband told me he was stuck in a high-stakes client meeting in Chicago last Friday. I announced, my voice slicing through the shocked murmurs of the crowd like a surgical scalpel. He told his mother he was absolutely exhausted from grueling corporate negotiations. But as you can clearly see on the screens behind me, his intense negotiations were actually taking place at the local airport with his 24-year-old assistant. Riley let out a sharp, terrified cry from her spot near the VIP bar. Senior board members and their elegantly dressed wives turned their heads in unison, staring at the young woman with unabashed disgust. "Naomi, please," Carter begged, reaching a trembling hand toward my arm. "I can explain this. It was just one mistake. We can fix this at home." I stepped back, instantly avoiding his desperate touch as if his skin were a physical poison. It was not one single mistake, Carter. It was a meticulously calculated 8-month campaign of deceit and betrayal. But ladies and gentlemen, I am not standing up here on this stage tonight to seek your sympathy over a broken marriage. Infidelity is merely a personal tragedy. What Carter has done to Zenith Tech is a massive federal crime. I gestured toward the screen again. Jamal initiated the next automated sequence. The humiliating image of the airport vanished rapidly, replaced by a complex, starkly illuminated financial ledger. Bright red highlights marked a series of massive outgoing wire transfers originating directly from the Zenith Tech Marketing Division accounts. Mr. Kensington stepped closer to the projection screen, his eyes narrowing dangerously as he immediately recognized the internal routing codes of his own company. "What exactly am I looking at right now, Naomi?" The CEO demanded, his voice thick with rising explosive fury. "You are looking at a masterclass in corporate embezzlement, Mr. Kensington," I stated clearly, projecting my voice to reach the very back of the hall. "Carter created a fraudulent shell company in Delaware called NC Holdings. He forged my signature on the incorporation documents to list me as the primary shareholder and sole guarantor. Then he actively used his executive authority within your sales division to approve fake vendor invoices funneling $640,000 of your corporate capital directly into that shell entity." "That is a complete lie," Carter shrieked, total panic breaking his carefully constructed facade into a million jagged pieces. "She is the auditor. She set up those offshore accounts. She is trying to frame me for this because she found out about the affair tonight." I anticipated that exact pathetic defense. I said, maintaining my rigid, calm posture. I nodded to the back of the room again. The projection screen shifted instantly. A split screen appeared. On the left side was a detailed geographic map of the city, with a blinking red dot pinned to a luxury penthouse on West Fifth Avenue. On the right side were the Zenith Tech internal security logs, featuring Carter's specific employee badge number. "This is where arrogance becomes a fatal liability," I explained, looking directly at the board of directors seated in the front row. Carter utilized a virtual private network to hide his digital tracks when initiating the fraudulent wire transfers, but he carelessly executed those transfers while connected to the residential wireless network of the penthouse he purchased for his mistress. Furthermore, the building access logs place him alone inside your secure fourth-floor server room at the precise moments the dual authorization protocols were manually overridden. Mr. Kensington flipped open the physical folder I had handed him earlier. He quickly scanned the printed security logs and the IP tracer reports Jamal had compiled. The evidence was absolute, structured with flawless forensic precision. The CEO turned to look at Carter, his expression hardening into pure, unadulterated rage. "You stole from this company?" Mr. Kensington growled, stepping aggressively toward Carter. "You stole from us to fund your pathetic double life." "I am not finished, Mr. Kensington," I interjected, keeping the momentum entirely under my strict control. "Carter did not just steal your money to buy commercial real estate. He also used it to accessorize his companion. If you look at page 12 of the audit report in your hands, you will find a wire transfer receipt for $40,000 routed from the shell company to a high-end downtown jeweler." I turned my body, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly across the ballroom at Riley. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving the young assistant completely exposed under the glaring chandelier light. The diamond necklace currently resting on Riley's collarbone was purchased with stolen Zenith Tech capital, I declared, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You are quite literally looking at your missing corporate funds," Riley shrieked, grabbing the heavy diamond necklace as if the precious stones were suddenly burning her skin. She fumbled with the intricate clasp, her hands shaking violently. She ripped the jewelry from her neck, throwing it onto a nearby cocktail table. The heavy piece hit the glass surface with a sharp, echoing clatter. "I had absolutely no idea," Riley screamed, dark mascara tears ruining her flawless makeup. "He told me he was a self-made millionaire. He told me he made his money from early tech investments. I did not know it was stolen." She did not wait for a single response. Riley hiked up the hem of her inappropriate red dress and sprinted toward the emergency exit, bursting through the heavy doors and disappearing into the night, completely abandoning the man she had sworn to love. Carter collapsed onto his knees right in the middle of the stage. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a wretched, pathetic sob. The golden boy of Zenith Tech, The arrogant manipulator who thought he could destroy my life and walk away clean was reduced to a weeping broken shell in front of hundreds of his peers. The trap had snapped shut with bone-crushing force. There was no escape, no manipulation, and no charming smile that could save him now. Carter looked up through his trembling fingers, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly as he desperately grabbed the polished edge of the wooden podium to steady himself. He turned to Mr. Kensington, his hands raised in a frantic begging gesture. "Mr. Kensington, you have to listen to me," Carter pleaded, his voice cracking loudly over the microphone. "This is a setup. Naomi's brother-in-law is a cybersecurity expert for the government. He is a professional hacker. He fabricated all of these IP addresses and server logs to frame me because Naomi found out about my affair tonight. They are trying to extort me. They manufactured the entire digital trail to ruin my reputation." It was a pathetic, predictable pivot. Carter was reverting to his core instinct, attempting to gaslight the entire room and cast himself as the innocent victim of a malicious conspiracy. Before Mr. Kensington could respond to the desperate accusation, heavy footsteps sounded against the wooden steps of the stage. Jamal walked up, his posture tall, his shoulders squared, projecting the undeniable confidence of a man who held top-secret security clearances. As a highly respected African-American man operating at the absolute highest echelons of national cybersecurity, Jamal had faced down international syndicates. A sweating, cheating salesman in a custom tuxedo was practically microscopic to him. Jamal did not look angry. He looked entirely unimpressed. Jamal stopped a few feet away from Carter, looking down at him with quiet, unshakable authority. "I am not a hacker," Carter Jamal stated, his deep voice carrying easily through the microphone I had just stepped away from. "I am a federally contracted network security specialist. And because I fully anticipated you would try to accuse me of digital tampering, I did not just download your localized network logs. I submitted a formal request to the regional internet service provider via a third-party legal subpoena." Jamal reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sealed, certified envelope. He bypassed Carter entirely and handed the envelope directly to Mr. Kensington. "That envelope contains the certified data logs provided directly from the telecommunications company," Jamal explained, turning his attention to the CEO. "It verifies with absolute legal certainty that the IP addresses used to authorize the fraudulent wire transfers match the residential network of the penthouse Carter purchased. The data has been independently validated by a digital forensics firm. It is utterly tamper-proof. There is zero margin for error and zero possibility of fabrication. You can hand that envelope straight to the federal investigators." Carter's mouth hung open. His final desperate lie had been crushed before it could even take root. He looked at Jamal, realizing the immense technological wall he had just crashed into. "You hacked my personal phone," Carter stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. "That is an invasion of privacy. That is illegal." "I did not touch your physical device," Carter Jamal corrected him smoothly, his tone bordering on educational. "You connected your secret phone to my sister-in-law's home wireless router. When you did that, you voluntarily surrendered your device's hardware identification to her network administrator logs. You gave us the keys to your own prison cell because you were too cheap and too arrogant to buy a separate data plan." The sound of slow, deliberate clapping drew everyone's attention. My father, Richard, was walking down the center aisle of the ballroom, his silver hair catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. He climbed the stairs to the stage with the slow, measured pace of a judge taking the bench. He stood beside me, his presence radiating an overwhelming, heavy authority that made the executives in the front row sit up straighter. "My son-in-law has provided the digital weapon," Richard announced, his voice booming with 4 decades of courtroom command. "Now allow me to provide the legal execution." Richard pulled a thick legal binder from under his arm. He did not hand it to Carter. He handed it straight to Mr. Kensington. "Mr. Kensington, as a retired judge of the state court, I have reviewed the incorporation documents for the shell company NC Holdings." Richard said, his tone razor-sharp. "The signature designating my daughter as the primary shareholder is a verifiable forgery. We have already submitted the documents to a certified handwriting analyst. But more importantly, the corporate bylaws Carter drafted for that entity include a specific indemnification clause designed to shift the entire burden of commercial debt onto Naomi the moment a divorce is filed. Richard turned his piercing gaze toward Carter, who physically shrank under the scrutiny. "You thought you were a legal genius, Carter." Richard continued, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You thought you could manipulate the corporate tax codes to saddle my daughter with $350,000 in fraudulent bank loans while you walked away with a luxury property and clean hands. But you made a critical error. You committed wire fraud across state lines by registering the shell company in Delaware while operating it here. That elevates your little embezzlement scheme to a federal offense. The authorities do not look kindly on executives who use interstate digital wires to commit financial theft. You are looking at a mandatory minimum sentence that will strip away the best years of your life." Carter let out a sharp, ragged breath, clutching his chest. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting toward the emergency exits, but hotel security had already moved to block the doors at Mr. Kensington's silent signal. "You also overlooked the fact that the bank holding that fraudulent commercial loan has already been notified," Richard added mercilessly. "We triggered an immediate fraud alert this morning. Their legal team is currently freezing every single asset associated with your name, your blind trust, and that shell company. You have absolutely no money, Carter. You have no property. You have no leverage. You are entirely legally and financially bankrupt." Mr. Kensington opened the binder my father had handed him, his eyes scanning the certified legal documents, the forged signature analyses, and the irrefutable evidence of a massive breach of trust. He had spent years building the reputation of Zenith Tech, and this man had just dragged his company's name through the mud. The CEO's face hardened into a mask of pure corporate ruthlessness. He looked up, slamming the binder shut with a loud crack that echoed like a gunshot. "Carter Hayes," Mr. Kensington said, his voice cold and echoing with finality. "You are terminated from Zenith Tech, effective immediately. Security will escort you to a holding room until the authorities arrive. You will not collect a single dime of severance." Two large security guards stepped forward, flanking Carter on both sides. They grabbed him by the arms, hauling him up from the carpeted floor. He did not fight them. His legs simply gave out. He hung between the two massive men, like a broken puppet weeping. The tuxedo he had worn so proudly was rumpled and soaked with his nervous sweat. He looked pathetic. The entire ballroom, filled with the most powerful executives in the city, watched in absolute judging silence. There was no pity in their eyes. They were looking at a thief who had jeopardized their corporate reputation. A shrill, hysterical scream shattered the quiet atmosphere. Brenda shoved her way past a table of stunned investors, her face purple with rage. Cynthia followed closely behind her, looking panicked. "You did all this?" Brenda shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You planned this spectacle to ruin my son. You are a hateful woman. Who is going to take care of us now?" I stepped down from the stage, maintaining my perfect posture. I walked right up to my former mother-in-law. I did not raise my voice, but my words carried absolute finality. "I am not taking care of you, Brenda," I said coldly. "I subsidized your luxurious lifestyle for 3 years while you sat in my dining room mocking my career. You encouraged your son to drain my accounts to buy diamonds for a 24-year-old girl. You cheered for my destruction. But you miscalculated. As I told you earlier, the bank foreclosed on your property this afternoon. I legally severed the autopay." Cynthia gasped, pulling out her smartphone with trembling hands. She rapidly checked her personal email, looking for messages from the bank portal. Her face drained of all color in a matter of seconds. "Mom," Cynthia choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "The bank sent an expedited eviction notice. The house is gone. We have 30 days to vacate and all the credit lines are frozen. We have nothing left." Brenda let out a wretched gasp. She clutched her chest, her knees buckling beneath her silver dress. Cynthia grabbed her by the shoulders to keep her from collapsing onto the floor. The arrogant women who had treated me like a disposable appliance were now homeless and financially ruined. They built their comfortable lives on a foundation of my hard work, and I simply removed the foundation. Across the room, the emergency exit doors remained shut. Riley was completely gone. She sprinted out of the hotel, leaving the diamond necklace sitting abandoned on a cocktail table. She realized Carter was not a wealthy tech genius building a brilliant future for her. He was a broke federal criminal facing years in a penitentiary. She blocked his number before she even reached the sidewalk, vanishing into the city and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. Police sirens pierced the quiet ambiance of the ballroom. Flashing lights illuminated the massive glass windows of the hotel lobby. The authorities arrived exactly on schedule. Mr. Kensington gave a sharp nod to his security team. They dragged Carter toward the service elevators, hauling him away to be handed over to the federal investigators waiting in the lobby. He did not look back at me. He kept his head buried in his chest, consumed by his own absolute shame and destruction. I turned away from the stage. My father placed his hand on my shoulder, his eyes shining with profound pride. Jamal offered a sharp, respectful nod, snapping his laptop shut and securing it in his bag. We walked together down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd of executives parted for us, immediately offering a wide path. Nobody said a word. They knew they had witnessed a masterclass in forensic retaliation. We stepped out through the brass doors and into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The streetlights reflected beautifully against the wet pavement. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The suffocating weight of my toxic marriage was gone. I felt incredibly light, powerful, and unconditionally free. Now I sit here in the warmth of my living room. The divorce was finalized rapidly. Carter had zero legal standing, zero financial resources, and zero leverage. He signed the dissolution papers from a holding cell while awaiting his federal trial for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in a federal penitentiary. He lost his career, his reputation, and his freedom. Brenda and Cynthia were forced to pack their belongings into rented boxes. They moved into a cramped, inexpensive apartment on the far edge of the city, stripped of the country club status they valued above all else. They have to work minimum wage jobs just to survive. As for me, I kept my house, my flourishing career, and my dignity. I learned that true family is not defined by marriage certificates or in-laws who demand blind loyalty. True family is defined by the people who stand fiercely by your side when the entire world shatters. My father and Jamal proved exactly what loyalty looks like. Sometimes surviving betrayal does not mean crying in the dark. It means drying your eyes, gathering your irrefutable evidence, and letting the absolute truth do the destroying for you. Cutting toxic people out of your life is never a failure. It is the ultimate liberation. If you are currently sitting in the shadows, feeling like your reality has been dismantled by the people you trusted most, please remember my story. Do not ever let them see you break. Protect your assets, establish an unbreakable boundary, and take your power back. You are stronger than the lies they told you. Thank you for listening today. Please share your stories of overcoming betrayal and finding justice in the comments below. Someone needs to hear your strength. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and see you next time. When catastrophic betrayal strikes, the immediate human instinct is to react, to scream, to confront, and to demand immediate answers. However, Naomi's journey teaches us a profoundly different and empowering lesson: the immense power of emotional restraint and calculated patience. In the face of total heartbreak, Naomi did not let her immediate anger compromise her long-term survival. Her father's advice at the airport set the tone for her victory. Reacting in the heat of the moment only gives the manipulator the upper hand to hide their tracks and twist the narrative. By choosing to mask her devastation, she retained the ultimate element of surprise. This level of emotional compartmentalization is not about denying pain or pretending everything is fine. Rather, it is about fiercely protecting oneself. It is about understanding that true justice requires a clear mind, strategic planning, and undeniable evidence, not just righteous fury. The story brilliantly illustrates that toxic people and manipulators thrive on chaos and emotional reactions. When you deny them that reaction, you completely strip away their power over you. Naomi's ability to sit quietly at the dinner table with her deceitful in-laws, or to calmly sign fraudulent documents with a phantom signature, demonstrates that true strength often lies in silence. She transformed her crippling grief from a debilitating weight into a razor-sharp tool for her liberation. We learn that taking back our power sometimes means playing the long game. We must secure our boundaries, protect our resources, and let the undeniable truth do the heavy lifting for us entirely on our own terms. It is a striking reminder that our self-worth is never defined by the betrayals we suffer, but by how fiercely we defend our own dignity. If you have ever had to build strict boundaries to protect your peace, share your story of resilience in the comments below.